So, welcome everybody. The name of this session is Mapping Epistemological Challenges of Studying Transformations to Sustainability. My name is Rodrigo Martinez. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Stockholm Resilience Center. And this activity is part of the activities of the working group of the on governance of social ecological systems, led by Elke Kerner and Maya Schluter. And we have several subgroups, and this subgroup is the Epistemological Challenges group. The objective of this session is to get a sense of what are the challenges that are perceived in our community, the epistemological challenges. And we think that this is relevant because transformations research is quite a young field and there are multiple visions. So we want to reflect about we want to identify and reflect about the challenges that people working in different fields and have different experiences can perceive. This activity might be part of a publication, so you will be invited to participate at the end of this session if you are interested in these topics. So I think, well, we will have a talk by Michelle Moore. She is, sorry. Sorry, this is going to be messy. Michelle, this is a bit messy. I will ask you to please introduce yourself when it's your turn. Yeah, she's an expert scholar on transformations. And she will tell us a little bit about what transformations is. And I will tell you a little bit about some of the epistemological challenges that, or the way in which we can think about them. So we can think about challenges that have to do with producing evidence, with the theoretical commitments that we get when we select a particular framework, challenges that have to do with how what we learn in a specific study can be extrapolated or generalized, how to build theory, especially when we come from different fields, how to proceed to do knowledge integration, especially being mindful that different knowledge systems have entail power relations, how to use knowledge, especially when we want to use it for action. How do we know that what we learn in science can be transferred in action? And another challenge is how can we convey how confident are we about the knowledge that we have? So as a bit of a warm-up, we're gonna go on a Menti. So please go to Menti and introduce this code and answer the question, what are the feelings that you associate to doing transformations research?
Rodrigo, could you drop the... Oh, perfect. Otherwise, I was just going to say, can you drop the code in the chat box? Thanks.
Yeah, so you see the code? Yes. We're starting to have some answers. I'm going to share. Yeah, so we have a word cloud. And in these kind of clouds, the size of the word represents the frequency of it seems that also the centrality of the word represents how often it has been typed. And we have hope, uncertainty, anxiety, excitement, creativity. Uncertainty is growing, urgency, unlearning. Finally, complex, critical knowledge, trepidation, action, confuse, transdisciplinary, system change. Yeah, let's see if there's like a few more. It seems that we have 16 answers, but this is interesting. I think it has become more acknowledged that these kind of feelings influence the way we do research. So we thought that it was important to give a moment to the feelings, because yeah, this is also part of the experience that we have when we do science on this particular field. So is there someone who wants to share why they decided to write the word that you wrote? Maybe? Okay, I don't see hands. Okay. So without
I don't know
further
where the
ado,
hand is.
sorry?
I said I forgot where the hand is. I'm used to working in teams, so I was just like, what? How do I
Yeah, but
hand
yeah, please.
hand?
Socrates,
Yes,
welcome. Mm.
well, I entered fuzzy and also intangible. It was like I tried to think like, okay, what are the feelings that you associate? And it's a tougher question than what are sort of things that you associate. So, but when I do research into transformations, it's, yeah, I think a challenge that is also being addressed today is how do you kind of define or get a grip on when something could be called transformative. And I talk about this with my colleagues quite often, and it's a challenge because it's both in the process but also in the outcomes and in the direction and dimension, and it's very substantive. So all of those things at the same time. So that's why it's such a cool subject.
Thanks for sharing, Socrates. I think I can relate to that feeling pretty much. Okay, then now that we have getting in touch with our feelings about transformations, now let's do a little bit of thinking. Michelle Moore has prepared a presentation where she has reflected about the epistemological challenges that she has encountered in her work. So let's hear what she has to present. Thank you very much, Michelle. The floor is yours.
Oh, perfect. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Really nice to see some familiar faces and names and see some new ones as well. If there's anyone who's just sort of coming into the area of transformations, I think there's lots of us who've been trying to grapple with the messiness that is this research field for a while. So definitely holding up my hands and saying welcome to you. Nice to have you here. I was just going to start with, I have to say, in terms of feelings, I think I had some feelings about the word epistemological challenges. And I wanted to actually start with that because I think it was one of those words that I wasn't necessarily trained in my undergraduate career. And I think it can be challenging in itself. So I thought if you can access the group chat, if you hit the chat button, you should be able to see the meeting group chat. And I just thought we could start with an exercise while I'll start sharing my screen. But if you can start to type out just without hitting enter so that we can hit enter all together at the same time, but just take a minute to first type out without hitting enter what you think of when you think of the word epistemological or epistemology. How would you define it in your way? While you're typing but not hitting enter, I'll get my screen sharing as well. now that I shared my screen, I realize now I'm not going to be able to see what you put in the chat box. So I'll ask Rodrigo. So why don't we all hit enter now? And Rodrigo, if you can share a few.
I'm gonna read. So we got how can we access the thing we want to study, related to knowledge production, ways of knowing and learning about the world, how we come to know what we know, mental model, knowledge system equals power structure, how do we know knowledge, the study of science, how to conduct science and the way of investigating the process of knowledge, a way of accessing what we assume real. What do you think?
So some patterns there for sure, but I think also you see, yeah, we come out with our own ideas a little bit about what it means. And I have to say, while I was preparing this, I did want to start with a few disclaimers, which was, and I haven't read this book on the left here, this Isms and Ologies, but I had this feeling when I first, I worked in government for a while before I went back to do my PhD. And when I did my PhD in global governance and re-entered that whole literature in the political science field, I felt like sometimes people just add the word neo and ism to everything and make it sound smart. And so I saw this book and I thought, yeah, this kind of, I get this feeling. So I think I just wanted to start with this disclaimer that even when we start talking about epistemology and epistemological challenges, that these words themselves can be, they have worked in as gatekeeping a little bit for communities who may not feel comfortable with this language. And so I just wanted to just, give us a chance to get on the same page with how we were all thinking about it. And I think, again, I often go back to when I hear these terms, ontologies and all the ologies, right? This article by Métis scholar Zoe Todd, who had this interesting blog, which later turned into a research or an article, which was ontology is just another word for colonialism. And in that, she's really making the case that it was more about the way that Euro-Western scholarship often doesn't acknowledge this sort of where some ideas have originally come from. But I think there's also just this recognition that these terms can exclude. So I just wanted to start with that disclaimer. And I also wanted to start with another disclaimer about transformations, which I think, Socrates, you were just getting at in your comment, which is that there are lots of different ways into this field, depending on which, which way you find your way in and which lens you're bringing to this. But there are lots of different schools of thought. I just have a few. I'm heavily biased personally towards the social ecological systems resilience perspective on sustainability transformations. That's where I spent a lot of the time, my career doing work, but also have spent time doing a lot of kind of development around from transitions theory, which is also another kind of whole community of work. There's work from the pathways approach, which has been, and often these start off with certain hubs. The Drift Institute was really recognized, but also a lot of work in Australia. And then now it's expanded globally, and pathways approach being associated with in the UK. A lot of work there. And a leverage points perspective, of course, Danella Meadows starting off that argument around leverage points, but that being taken up by the group at Lafana, and again, now spreading all over the world. So there's lots of different ways to think about this. And I will say that much of this literature, we're very clear that we're being very normative. Like we are talking about transformations to sustainability and justice, not there's a real direction to that. But what I will say is that across this literature, first of all, I borrow heavily from all of them, but I think there is actually quite wide agreement about how we define what a transformation actually is. Of course, because for reasons that we can't keep plagiarizing ourselves when we publish, we all keep describing it a little bit differently each time we write about it, but I think there is wide agreement there. I also draw a lot from Indigenous governance scholarship. I would say that a lot of Indigenous governance scholarship is not necessarily talking about using this terminology of transformations to sustainability and justice. They're often talking about issues around autonomy, self-determination, land back, issues like that. But I think, again, there's a lot to learn. In many ways, the things that they are arguing for are going to require transformations. And so I draw heavily on that. And then, of course, there's some scholars also doing combinations. So I have this piece by Melanie Goodchild, Anishinaabe scholar Melanie, who's been doing work on kind of combining complex adaptive systems approaches to transformations with her Anishinaabe ways of knowing. Also draw quite a bit from social movements and social and systems innovation. So just that disclaimer is that, there's lots of ways into this. And so you may be coming from one of them, but I also want to say that anytime before we talk about transformations, I think it's really important to recognize that there are many transformations that have already happened that have not led to sustainability or justice. And we're not starting the kinds of transformations people are often calling about for now. While it's very trendy to call about for transforming everything these days, we're not starting from some magical clean slate. And I have this quote here from Potawatomi Nation scholar Kyle Powys-White, who's based at the University of Michigan, who argues that even talking about it as if it is some magical clean slate actually erases that there is knowledge, and again, from different ways of knowing and understanding transformations. Okay, so then the definition I just want to work with today, and again, kind of recognizing and drawing on authors and scholars from across these different kind of communities of thought around transformations, is that we define it as fundamental shifts in how authority, power, and resources are structured and flow, how the practices and processes that reflect and reproduce those structures, and the norms, values, and beliefs that underpin those structures and processes. And again, because I come from the social ecological systems perspective, I would add in that those are in some ways major social structures, but we also think about how those are connected to ecological systems across multiple scales, right? That we can be maybe transforming one of those things, but if it's not also transforming how we're in relationship to the planet and to the non-human, that we're probably not going to be getting towards sustainability. So in that definition, and a lot of the work that's been done across these different communities has been really kind of showing that transformations involve multiple phases. This is a really old, kind of very simple heuristic for talking about these multiple phases. Again, you know, each community has different images and different heuristics, and sometimes we make them more complicated, and then sometimes I go back to this 20-year-old really simple one. And this is just a way of talking about preparing a system for change. And actually, if you think of that red cup, almost like making it shallower and shallower so that it eventually, this ball can tip into whatever the green is going to become. But we also know from historical case studies that transformations tend to be really long. They're multi-generational. Some of our historical cases have noticed that we've observed that I think the fastest one we've observed was 50 or 60 years, and some of them taking up to 200 years. So of course, the question a lot of people are interested in is, how do we speed those up? How do we do it in ways that we're still, you know, the thing that might be the fastest may not be the most just. And so how do we think again about the processes for getting to sustainability and justice being themselves sustainable and just? And in both of, and this is just a different model, it's called the X curve. This came out of some work with the transition scholar in the Netherlands. But I think in both of these cases, we really want to emphasize that there are kind of making and unmaking dynamics. So again, if you want to make that cup shallower, or in this case, you want to unmake a system, and you also want to create the alternative, right? And so there, again, in terms of epistemological challenges, which aspect of that are you even looking at in a particular study is really important to sort of get clear on. And I say all of this because I wanted to put then some of the challenges in context to think about these making and unmaking dynamics, and how we can dissolve or disassemble certain feedbacks or relationships in a system so that we can then reconfigure them in different ways. Okay, so very first challenge, and this one's going to probably be my longest one because I have to admit, I'm still really kind of wrestling with this in my head. And so I don't have some sort of like tight, clear message or elevator pitch, but it's this idea around epistemic justice and transdisciplinarity. And I think because transformations research is often very problem-oriented and very transdisciplinary in nature, we're often using multiple methods and sometimes methods from multiple ways of knowing to try to think about transformations. And of course, then this has sort of basic challenges that it brings, right? That we need research teams. Often it's very difficult to do that as an individual. So we need large teams with that kind of plural forms of knowledge in it, and then an ability or even agility to sort of shift between methods and even epistemologies then over the course of the research journey. But I think possibly because of the awareness that's generated from these experiences and that have been happening over time in the transformations community and trying to work across these multiple ways of knowing, there's also this recognition of the entanglement between social, political, economic justice, ecological justice with epistemic justice as well. So many transformation scholars have been engaging in reflexivity and embedding reflexive practice into their methods and methodologies. And I'm thinking Fiona Marshall and Florina Schneider and Julia Wittmeyer as several examples. And while that often focuses on the role of the researcher in relationship to, what's happening in this transdisciplinary kind of configuration, I think there's also a much deeper question being asked by these scholars about epistemic justice. So in the words of Leah Temper and Daniela Del Bene, what forms of knowledge creation and whose can actually can inform transformations to sustainability if conventional forms that were being used in academia created epistemic injustice. So it's a question that many people are wrestling with while they're simultaneously trying to do this research. And thinking about how can transformations research itself as we're doing it be contributing to transforming research epistemologies and ones that contribute to this epistemic forms of justice as well. So possibly as a result of the recognition, then I think there has been this huge push towards more collaborative, more participatory forms of engagement, and what Spaten refers to as an epistemic reordering. So trying to actually do that in the research we're kind of conducting ourselves. But I think there's also criticisms of that. So I think of Indigenous elder Elwood Jimmy and Brazilian Canadian Indigenous scholar Vanessa Andreotti, who point out these ideas of participation, of inclusion, of collaboration. They themselves are embedded with a whole bunch of assumptions that they are viable and desirable ways of addressing previous, current, and possibly future harms that have been done. So I think there's still, and others are still kind of challenging, like we see these new methods emerging and these new efforts, but are they actually still, to what extent are true sustainability transformations being triggered? And Spaten also argues about how we even define these words. And Socrates, you mentioned this at the beginning, like how do we even define these words? So how do you actually even get a sense of whether you're contributing to them? If there are plural ways of thinking and understanding the words sustainability and justice from very different ways of knowing, how can we actually say that we're, how can we assess whether something has contributed to any of those things if we're not sure what we're even transforming towards, or there is an agreement necessarily? So I think that I really think embedded within these practices is this kind of growing awareness that we need sort of the maturity and accountability embedded within our epistemologies to kind of grapple with difference and the incommensurability sometimes that different ways of knowing will bring, right? That is sort of honoring that plurality rather than trying to dismiss it or sweep it under and universalize what we found together. So to say all of that, which was a very wordy way and using the word epistemology about 100 times, I think this is another image that scholars Simon West and Carolyn Schill have developed around thinking about how different methods and different ways of knowing can contribute. And so again, if you're more into a visualization, maybe this can help. And I think a lot of people think what we're doing is right? Using different methodological approaches to contribute to an interconnecting sense of the puzzle, interconnecting realities. But often what we're doing is actually right? That we have very different methodological approaches and they contribute to very different parts of a puzzle. And they do help if you can honor and listen to both of them. They do help to understand a bigger picture, but that they're not just like, we don't need to just mash them together and pretend they're all one big piece of the puzzle. Okay, so the next couple of challenges I promise will be a little bit faster. I think there's challenges around trying to grapple with agency and transformation scholarship and locating the sites of knowledge. There is recognition that transformative agency is distributed in a system and it's across humans and non-humans, and there's scholars recognizing that. There's a lot of work that recognizes that transformative agency often sits with those who are epistemically marginalized in a system. And that's often, sort of the grassroots and bottom-up pushes for transforming systems comes from those places. But I think one of the things that we're still grappling with is how to better consider non-human knowledge creation. So there are different ways of knowing that are and knowing and being and doing that are really good at centering these relationships and honoring the knowledge and teachings that sit within the non-human. But that's in Western forms of scholarship, that's still really difficult to account for and consider how non-humans, you know, there's species we don't even know exist yet, but they exist and they know things about how they are in relationship to ecosystems. And we actually don't know how to grapple with that very well yet, I would say, in my personal opinion, in transformation scholarship. And I think of Tarahumara scholar Enrique Salmon, who talks about kin-centric relations and ecologies, and sort of thinking about these relationships in very different ways and centering that knowledge is being created there that will shape sustainability transformations. So some scholars are turning towards ideas around relationality, I think, to try to get at some of that human, non-human relationships. And I think this was just an image from a review that was led by Simon West recently, and talking about even within that, there's very different approaches to relationality and relational perspectives. And so we were looking at different kinds of those and thinking about what did they say about agency and what did they say about scale. And I think we found that there was really different ways that people think about how scales are produced, and then how scale shapes what is known or who is knowing and who benefits from that knowledge. So that brings me to my third challenge, which is about scale. And so I think there's a whole kind of mix of things that is happening when we talk about transforming governance and when we talk about transformations in general. And I think one of the things is there's lots that's around what Manson would call scale generalization. So trying to apply lessons or knowledge that's generated from one scale to some other scale. And I think, again, you know, a lot of people interested in scaling for impact and sort of how do you take something that was sort of quite locally developed and somehow have that become more dominant, are interested in that kind of generalization. There's issues of scale causality, so how something in one spatial or temporal scale or some other defined scale may have impacts across and be interrelated with other orders of magnitude. There's lots of work on telecouplings and on cascading effects, so how something how something in one place could be a positive transformation, could actually cause a negative transformation somewhere in a really geographically distant place. And there's a whole bunch of operationalization of scales in research, of course. We make choices about where we should actually focus. People often start off with thinking about the rationale for transformations is coming from like global climate models and sort of knowledge that's being developed with really aggregated data, but then are working in really place-based work. And again, operationalizing things like maybe at a household level or in a small scale fishery or small scale farming communities. So again, it makes it really complicated to sift through how we're moving across scales and where knowledge is being generated at different scales and how we kind of mash them together. And of course, people are experimenting with how to do that very deliberately. And again, I think you see this push towards these place-based and participatory approaches that I was mentioning earlier, but we also see there's lots of interest in big data approaches and of course AI. People are very aware of the harms that are and risks that are associated with it, but also trying to think about how can it possibly contribute to some sort of positive, more sustainable and just transformations. But these actually, you know, they come from very different sort of ways of thinking about how to produce knowledge about what counts as data and how to share findings that come from that kind of data. So again, I think we don't want to just sort of universalize them and sort of not deal with the tensions or incommensurabilities that maybe they represent, but actually think carefully about those. This is just one example or a figure of that was developed by Naomi Terry and colleagues. They were actually looking at African ways of knowing around temporal scales. And in transformations, often people end up kind of falling back on really linear logics to talk about temporal scales. They'll talk about, you know, the past, the present, and we're going to transform in the future. Very linear ways of thinking about that. But of course, again, different ways of knowing and different epistemologies deal with time in very different ways. And they were looking here at, you know, more circular versions, Sankofa, which was kind of this intermingling of past, present, and future all in one. And then this projected futures version, and talking about how these all actually are informing one another and are all entangled. So very last point I just want to make, and it comes from a lot of the work that we've been doing, Manana Milkerade and I have been doing around imagination. And we'd had a special issue 4 years ago looking at imagination and transformations. And I think one of the things we found was people are really experimenting in research with sort of deliberately designing processes that can support transformations. And in that case, trying to, imagine alternative futures and support capacity to do so. But we also found there's a real kind of everyday quality to imagining futures and kind of making futures, right? There's someone writes a blog post and someone comments back and starts a bit of a conversation. You listen to the news, you hear a political speech, you watch a movie, listen to music. All of those things are often inputs to how we're thinking about and sort of imagining alternative futures. And I think how knowledge is being generated in the everyday is actually really difficult to include in sustainability transformations research and studies of it. It's much easier to study these very deliberately designed processes that are more bounded. So trying to kind of, again, grapple with where knowledge is being created about this, sometimes in solidarity movements and social movements, again, things happening on the fringes, and sort of honoring and lifting that up into our work remains really important. So that's probably lots of challenges to at least get us started. And looking forward to discussing this with all of you. Thanks. See if I can just stop sharing for you.
Thank you very much, Michelle.
There. Oh, thanks. Moving thumbs.
Nice. Yeah, I think you have really put our minds in the right channel. So now we're gonna move into the workshop part of the session. So I'm just gonna give you guys an overview of what is gonna happen for the rest of the session. So we're gonna have two activities. We're gonna go into breakout groups of around 5 people. And first, we're gonna have an activity where we will try to map how confident we feel about the knowledge that we have about transformations, and also map the generality of that knowledge and see what kind of cluster emerges out of that. And then we will have a second activity where we will just write the challenges that we have encountered or that we have or that we know of. And then we will try to find cluster or commonalities. Then we will come back into plenary and we will share the maps of the second activity only. And that will be it. So now I will sort you guys into breakout groups. Since we have less people than expected, then I think it's fine if we have only 5 breakout groups. So the facilitators will be Marcin, Aminta, Pablo, Eduardo, and myself. Okay, so I'm gonna now sort you guys into breakout groups.
Rodrigo, do you
Yes.
want to give the participants a chance to ask some questions to Michelle, or first, perhaps, quickly, or you don't want to?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, please, if someone has any reaction, yeah, we have a couple of minutes. We have time.
Perhaps I have one question. You can start.
I figured that's where this was going.
Yeah, you mentioned the non-human knowledge creation and that we also should integrate non-human knowledge. So, and you already mentioned it's really hard to understand for us to from a European scientific understanding or knowledge system, coming from a European scientific knowledge system. So can you give some more ideas what that could be, or how could we integrate non-human knowledge, please?
Yeah, Well, it doesn't come from, yeah, I wouldn't say it's my strength at all. So I'm probably fumbling for examples, but I mean, I think of, again, Métis scholar Zoe Todd has done some really interesting work in thinking about, she has a piece on fish as kinship, and kind of thinking about, also wrestling with, she's been kind of doing a lot of work on fossils of animals, but also, and particularly dinosaurs, but also that has links to what's really oil in soil in terms of that kind of carbonization process, and sort of just kind of rethinking that relationship of like, what if we, it was hard. She was reflecting on how it was hard for her to think of oil, something she's kind of often actively been protesting against, and thinking about it as we have a relationship to it still. And because of what's been happening in the past, and now we often have sort of negative connotation about certain aspects of the non-human, and positive relationships to their kind of positive inklings, but how do we actually start recognizing them all as kin? And how do we work from that way? And I think I was using that work in some teaching, and actually it came from one of the students who was recognizing, like, she often feels like she has that kinship when she's taking a walk in a forest with large old growth trees, but she definitely doesn't think about it when she sees the logs on a truck after they've been harvested, and just sort of like, just the phase of it or the state of it, how it can shift how you're thinking about that relationship. So I think some of that I've been learning from my students, actually, and some of my Indigenous teachers. I don't know if that really helps how to do it, then including it in, but I think, again, they've been talking a lot about developing methods then for including that voice. And then again, I think in practice, people are even pushing it farther and trying to think about there was just the Summit of the Future, and trying to think about how do we include voices from the future in kind of governance decision-making now, right? And that those intergenerational as well as the non-human relationships too. So I think you do see it showing up in practice. Some of the rights to nature frameworks are trying to get at that from a legal perspective, of course. And how do you sort of hardwire them into our institutional structures? But again, because those institutional structures themselves often weren't designed for that in the beginning, you see it getting contorted, and it's a struggle to actually kind of really see implementation through with what was intended when trying to create those kinds of changes. So yeah, definitely a challenge.
Thank you very much. And now also thank you for the really excellent presentation. Very inspiring.
Let's take one last question. Victoria?
I don't know if this is the place for it, but maybe very briefly. Thanks so much for the great presentation. I'm just maybe this is more something for the group discussion, but sometimes I'm a bit afraid that we are overthinking things a lot when in our academic worlds, and that very often when we go out into the real world, decisions are just made based on maximizing profit for just a few stakeholders. And my question is what is we're doing here a lot of work around epistemic justice and so on and so forth, but how does this integrate into like the real world of the Wild West, where basically the strongest normally wins and things like that? I'm not saying that that's the I mean, I can see that our work can create narratives, our work can provide logical justifications for acting differently, but I was just wondering how you see this reality versus us in our offices.
Do you mean in terms of like how transformations research really has a impact in kind of real life?
Yeah.
In general, or just, yeah. I mean, I think you do. So, I mean, I think there are lots of scholars, and partly that's this push towards transdisciplinarity, is like, let's not just do research in academia, right? Like that this is done with often maybe researchers playing a role of facilitating a space where people in a particular area that want to talk about a specific set of problems and their relationships. So I think you do absolutely see see real changes. I think there's things like the community-based natural resource management push that came through kind of like the past 20 years. You can see real shifts in who's getting power and authority to make decisions. In some instances, that's not true for every single place around the whole world and in every single sector, right? So you do absolutely see some real transformations that are taking place. But of course, we can get caught up in and I think even when we're talking about epistemological challenges, as I said at the beginning, even some of these words can kind of keep a distance between the research and the practice of it, of course. I think in my experience in the transformations community, because it is so closely connected, and even like the conferences that are happening every couple of years are really done with practitioners, I don't think you see like as big of a gap as you do in some fields. But of course, you know, in the grand scheme of things, parts per million CO2 is still going up. Like we're still not seeing this impact at a large scale, right? That there's lots of really, really innovative things happening on the ground around the world in small scales, but it doesn't add up to this thing that people are sort of you know, you're hearing a lot of calls for. And I think there is frustration around that and still questions about then how do we do this work at scales that matter in the Anthropocene? Right. So yeah, I think that definitely remains a challenge, but I don't think it's just a challenge that researchers face. I think it's a challenge that practitioners on the ground are also wrestling with, as you say, like when you see like the reality of what ends up getting decided. I think sometimes change makers actually even also, sorry, now I'm making this a really long answer, but one last thing, change makers often see their own ideas about what should be changed in the world, and then the reality of like the compromises that happen as you go through a process of like it's never as pure as it was in your head, right? But that's because of that plurality and that way of being in relationship to other too. Like it's also important to honor that it is going to shift and change, but that there's still integrity to like the actual change that needs to happen, right? Somehow has to be protected. So knowing when to compromise and knowing what to compromise kind of thing, I think can be useful for people in practice, and giving them tools to think about those and frameworks to think about those is certainly an important role that researchers play. Sorry, that was really long-winded, kind of rambling my way through this, thinking out loud. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. Now we're going to go into breakout groups. I'm going to assign you guys manually. We have one more message. Okay. Maria says, Victoria, from my perspective as a long-time practitioner in journalism and now starting research project in journalism studies, how goal framing in new journalism have not changed. The profit focus you mentioned, how it could change. Okay, still no research in journalism studies, but I want to change that. Okay. So
Hi, I request all of you to please join the breakout rooms at the time. Hi, you can join the breakout rooms.
Welcome back. We're slowly returning. It seems that we left some people behind, or some had to take a train. Okay, so we have just a few minutes, so it would be nice to see what are the clusters that we came up with. Okay, yeah, we have more with us. Nice. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the activity. I saw some of the maps and they look very interesting. So now it's time to share. We might be like a bit of a couple minutes over time, but let's try to keep it not longer than that. So now all the facilitators will present the clusters. And is there anyone who would like to start? Okay, then I will volunteer. I hope you can see my screen. So we found three main clusters, one on knowledge-related ethical challenges, one on definitional or conceptual challenges, and another one on practical challenges. And we acknowledge that some of the challenges or some of the post-its actually touch several of these categories. An example of the knowledge-related ethical challenges is, when are transformations good for whom? An example of definitional or conceptual challenges is like, what is transformative? And we found in the other exercise that depending on how we define transformation, also the generality and the confidence of knowledge we have changes. So it's very important, the conceptual part apparently. And then practical challenges, for instance, how to monitor a transformational process or how to evaluate actual change. So that was our team. Do you want to go next, Marcin?
Yes, thank you, Rodrigo. So I will share the screen right now. I hope you can see it.
Yeah.
I have to confess that it was not easy to find the clusters, and Nora actually had an idea about how the clusters could look like. So I don't know, Nora, would you like to say, because I think you will explain better the idea of clusters than me.
I mean, I can say something like the cluster on the upper left is about kind of the performance of transformations with regards to sustainability or justice, equity. So how questions like who wins and who loses from a transformation, what does it mean for different groups of people? Then we had another cluster on to the right, which is about how to study a moving target. So how do we know when a transformation is really happening? How can we also, as a there's then the question also, how can we control a transformation? And then we had one cluster. I have to see what our idea was here. Marcin, do you know?
I think that the last cluster we had some issues to actually name it. So maybe the last cluster was a little bit more general. So this is what we arrived.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Aminta, would you like to go next?
Sure, I can share my screen. So, yeah, we came to 2.5 clusters. The first one was more related to these interactions between subject and reality. On one side, the role of reality in subject, how acknowledging that our research is shaped by personal experiences, etc., and that we are not separating from it, but also acknowledge that the subject radically changes the understanding that we have of transformation. A little bit of what has been discussed before. The other one is the fact that time is a cross-cutting aspect, both in like what is time, what is the time dimension on the transformation, and even more when we start talking about issues around the future, how to know how it will turn out, and also talk about what is relevant, for example, in the long run. And the other more scattered things, one of them is like how to deal with normative issues. For example, what is successful, what is dangerous, and on other areas, a little bit more on inner transformations and the role of context on, for example, the variables that we choose, and navigating the fact that some stuff needs to be unlearned and grief issues. But this was a bit less, determined as a cluster.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eduardo, wanna go next, please?
Yeah. So we had quite a late start followed by some technical problem. Therefore, we couldn't really finish to, okay, you can see it, yeah. Building clusters. And however, I don't know if you can see already my screen. The thing that were identified were related to quite practical challenges. So followed by logistical, meaning publishing and founding, this distance between the political and practical action and the knowledge making. And then also, like, as you can see, public perception. And we didn't finish the discussion on geological repository sites, so I can, if the participant want to say something about it, of course, feel free to. But on the previous part, some more ologies related challenges, I can say, but that was not, it didn't came out in the second part of the exercise came out, but the challenges that came out were so more practical, let's say.
Great. Thank you very much, Eduardo. And finally, Pablo.
Okay. Let me share my screen. Okay, so we had the, can you see my screen? Yes. Was some interesting discussion around different topics, and the main ones that I tried to cluster, because we also had some technical difficulties, but I did it in the last minute. If my participants want to say something related to my clustering, they are invited to do so. But I think the main clusters are philosophical orientations. We had a very interesting discussion around the trade-offs concept. How do we define trade-offs? Because some participants, there was no critique around the concept. But from others, there could be some critique on how do you define trade-offs and what are the goals. And we narrowed down to a discussion between what is integrate, that how do you integrate within trade-offs, whether you integrate or there are complementarity of views and values and goals within trade-offs. This is one of my own downscaling of big areas of research, because I saw these boxes, but I didn't know how to classify them. So how do we downscale to place-based research these areas of research, like big topics like degrowth, perspectives on the planetary boundaries concepts, which is also, I know this is from my knowledge in the literature. Also a discussion around what is the role of plurality. Do we have to integrate all depending on the case, all views and values valid for a transition in a certain direction or not? And the last topic would be, how do we implement governance interventions that we have already identified? So what are the leverage points that we have to activate, we have to trigger, or the last one, implementing identified governance intervention for systems transformation in general. So how do we trigger once we identify the intervention per se? Thanks.
Yeah, so it seems that there are like some commonalities across clusterings. Some have to do with the practical part, others have to do with the normativity of it. So this is very interesting. We are unfortunately out of time. This group, we will follow up on this work. So if you guys are interested in this kind of work, please reach out to me. I'm gonna share my email here on the screen. We will present also the activities of this sub-working group on Wednesday. If you are interested in knowing what we're up to, what are our plans, you are welcome. And I would really like to thank Michele for your very inspiring and insightful talk, and also to all our facilitators for your great help. Have a nice lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much,
Bye-bye.
Rodrigo.
Bye.
Thanks,
So,
everyone.
Rodrigo,
Thank
thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you later.
Bye.